I can still see their faces from that day the moment they fell silent when he walked in. I was soaked through, my bridesmaid dress ruined, my dignity seemingly shattered. But they had no idea who my non-existent husband they'd been mocking really was. My name is Cassandra Bennett, and this is the story of how I finally broke free from the chains my family had wrapped around me for 30 years. Growing up in Baltimore's upper-middle-class suburbs should have been a privilege. My father, Richard Bennett, was a prominent defense attorney with his own firm downtown. My mother, Gloria Bennett, had made her name organizing charity galas that raised millions for various causes. From the outside, we were the perfect family, successful, sophisticated, and enviably connected. But perfection has a price, and in the Bennett household, that price was authenticity. I was the older daughter, the one who came first but somehow always came second. 3 years after me, my sister Victoria arrived like a golden sunrise that cast everything before it into shadow. Where I was studious and serious, Victoria was vivacious and charming. Where I earned straight A's through countless hours of study, Victoria breezed through with B's and a smile that made everyone forget to care about grades. The comparisons started early. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I won the state debate championship at 16, my parents spent the celebration dinner talking about Victoria's upcoming dance recital. When I graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins, they complained that my choice of a simple black dress for the ceremony lacked Victoria's flair for fashion. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. In family photos, I naturally gravitated to the edges, while Victoria sparkled in the center, our parents flanking her like satellites drawn to her gravitational pull. The truth was, I loved my sister. How could I not? She was sunshine personified, with our mother's delicate features and our father's commanding presence. She never asked for the favoritism, never demanded the spotlight. It simply found her, the way flowers turn toward the sun. But love and resentment can coexist. And as the years passed, the weight of being the other daughter began to suffocate me. I threw myself into my studies with the desperation of someone trying to outrun their own shadow. Law school seemed like the natural choice after all. I was Richard Bennett's daughter. But where he had chosen defense, I chose prosecution. Where he protected the accused, I sought justice for victims. Even in my career, I was defining myself in opposition to my family's expectations. The Atlantic Bureau of Legal Affairs wasn't the most prestigious posting for a young prosecutor, but it offered something my father's world never had the chance to make a real difference. We handled financial crimes, the kind that destroyed retirements and shattered small businesses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. That's how I met Dominic Hayes. The case file landed on my desk on a rainy Tuesday morning. Hayes Global, a cybersecurity firm, had uncovered a massive international money laundering operation while conducting a routine security audit for a client. The evidence was meticulously compiled, almost prosecutorially perfect. I remember thinking whoever had prepared this understood exactly what we would need for conviction. I scheduled a meeting with their CEO to discuss the findings. I expected some slick corporate type in an expensive suit who'd make my job harder with demands for confidentiality and control. Dominic Hayes defied every expectation. He arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, but somehow looked effortless rather than ostentatious. He was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 35, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Ms. Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me. I know your time is valuable." His handshake was firm, confident without being aggressive. But it was his eyes that caught me. They held a sharpness, an intelligence that seemed to see right through the professional facade I wore like armor. The meeting was supposed to last an hour. We talked for 3. Dominic didn't just understand the technical aspects of the crime, he understood the human cost. He spoke passionately about the small business owners who'd been defrauded, the elderly couples whose retirements had been stolen. When I mentioned that one of the victims reminded me of my grandmother, he leaned forward, genuinely interested in the story. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." he said after I'd finished telling him about Grand's insistence on keeping her own books even at 90. She was, I agreed, surprised to find myself sharing something personal with a witness. As the case progressed, Dominic became a regular fixture in our offices. He personally oversaw every piece of evidence his team provided, often staying late to ensure we had what we needed. On one particularly long evening, when we were preparing for a major hearing, he appeared with Chinese takeout for the entire team. "Fuel for justice," he said with a grin that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. We won the case. 17 defendants convicted, millions recovered for victims. At the celebration afterward, Dominic found me on the balcony of the hotel where we were having our victory party. "You're not much for celebrations," he observed, joining me at the railing. "I prefer the quiet moments," I admitted. "The noise, the attention, it's not really my thing." "I understand that," he said simply. And somehow, I believed he did. We talked until the party ended, about everything and nothing. About growing up feeling like you were never quite enough. About choosing paths that led away from family expectations. About finding meaning in work that mattered more than money. When he asked if he could see me again, outside of depositions and evidence reviews, my heart did something I hadn't felt in years. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Dominic had made the reservation under a fake name, smiling sheepishly when I raised an eyebrow. "Privacy is a bit of an occupational hazard in my line of work," he explained. "Plus, I wanted tonight to be just about us, not about Hayes Global or cybersecurity or anything else." Over homemade pasta and wine that tasted like sunshine, I learned about the man behind the CEO title, how he'd grown up poor in Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, how he'd taught himself to code on a second-hand computer held together with duct tape, how he'd built his company not for the money, though there was plenty of that now, but because he'd been a victim of identity theft at 19 and never wanted anyone else to feel that powerless. "What about you?" he asked, those storm cloud eyes focused entirely on me. What made Cassandra Bennett choose justice? I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone, about growing up in Victoria's shadow, about the weight of expectations I could never quite meet, about choosing prosecution because I wanted to be the person who stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. "You know what I think," Dominic said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I think your family has no idea how extraordinary you are." The sincerity in his voice undid me. I was used to compliments on my work, my dedication, my conviction rate. But Dominic saw something else. He saw me. We dated quietly for a year. Dominic understood my need for privacy, my reluctance to expose our relationship to my family's scrutiny. He never pushed, never demanded to be included in family gatherings where I knew he'd be subjected to my mother's interrogation and my father's dismissive assessment. "I'm falling in love with you, not your family," he told me one night as we walked along the inner harbor. "When you're ready to share this part of your life, I'll be here. But there's no rush." The proposal came on a rain-soaked evening in my apartment. I'd had a terrible day, lost a case I'd been sure we'd win, gotten a passive-aggressive email from my mother about missing Victoria's latest accomplishment, and spilled coffee all over my favorite suit. I came home to find Dominic cooking dinner, my apartment filled with the smell of garlic and fresh herbs. "Rough day?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. I nodded against his chest, feeling the tension start to drain away. This had become our routine. He somehow always knew when I needed him, showing up with food and comfort and the kind of quiet understanding I'd never known existed. After dinner, as we sat on the couch watching the rain streak down the windows, Dominic turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Cassandra," he began, and something in his voice made my heart skip. "I've been thinking about time lately. How we spend it, who we spend it with, what really matters." He shifted, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. And my breath caught. "I've built a successful company, made more money than I ever dreamed of. But none of it means anything compared to what we have. You see me not the CEO, not the tech mogul, just me. And I see you not the prosecutor, not the dutiful daughter, just the brilliant, compassionate, fierce woman who fights for justice and makes killer coffee and cries at dog adoption commercials. I laughed through the tears that were already forming. I want to spend all my time with you, he continued, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire that was perfect in its understated beauty. Will you marry me? The yes came without hesitation, without doubt. For the first time in my life, I was choosing something purely for myself, purely out of love. We married 2 months later in a tiny ceremony at the courthouse, with only Dominic's mother, his best friend Jake, and my former roommate from law school as witnesses. I wore a simple white dress I'd found at a vintage shop, and Dominic wore the same dark jeans and button-down combination he'd worn to our first meeting. You sure you don't want to tell your family? Dominic asked as we exchanged rings. I'm sure, I said, meaning it. This is ours, just ours. The secret felt like freedom. At family dinners, when my mother lamented my single status and compared me to Victoria's parade of successful boyfriends, I'd catch my own reflection in the mirror and see the secret smile of a woman who was deeply, completely loved. When my father made cutting remarks about my small ambitions and lack of social grace, I'd touch the wedding band hidden on a chain beneath my blouse and remember Dominic's voice calling me extraordinary. For 2 years, we built a life together in the spaces my family didn't occupy. Weekend mornings in our Harbor East penthouse, cooking breakfast together while the city woke up below us. Late nights working side by side, me on briefs, him on code, comfortable in our shared silence. Trips to places my family would never think to look for me, hiking in the Rockies, wine tasting in Portugal. A coding conference in Tokyo, where Dominic was the keynote speaker and I sat in the front row, bursting with pride. Don't you want them to know? Dominic would ask occasionally, usually after I'd come home from a particularly brutal family gathering. That you're happy, that you're loved, knowing is power, I'd reply. And I'm not ready to give them that power over us yet. He never pushed, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Dominic had reconciled with his own past, had brought his mother to live in a beautiful condo near us, had built bridges where there had been burns. He wanted the same for me, even if he didn't say it. The problem with secrets is that they create 2 versions of yourself, the one the world sees and the one you really are. The gap between my 2 selves grew wider with each passing month. At work, I was the confident prosecutor who'd just been promoted to head of the financial crimes division. At home with Dominic, I was a loved and loving wife, secure in my worth. But with my family, I remained the same overlooked daughter, the one who couldn't quite measure up. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to my office. Expensive paper, gold embossing, my parents' return address. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Bennett requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Victoria Ann Bennett, to Mr. Harrison Wells III. Of course, Harrison Wells III, heir to a banking fortune, the kind of match my mother had been engineering since Victoria's debutante days. The wedding would be the social event of the season, held at the Belvedere, with 500 of Baltimore's finest in attendance. I stared at the invitation, noting the date 6 weeks away. A Saturday when Dominic and I had planned to fly to California for the opening of Hayes Global's new West Coast headquarters. That evening, I showed him the invitation. He studied it carefully, then looked at me with those perceptive eyes. You don't want to go, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't, I admitted. But if I don't, they'll never let you forget it, he finished. We sat in silence for a moment before Dominic spoke again. What if we went together? What if this was the moment? I shook my head immediately. Victoria's wedding, I can't do that to her. It's her day. Is it? Dominic asked gently. Or is it your parents' day from what you've told me? Victoria would be happy with a beach ceremony and a barbecue. He was right. Of course, Victoria had confided in me once, during a rare moment of sisterly bonding, that she dreamed of a simple wedding. But Gloria Bennett didn't do simple. I'll think about it, I promised. As the weeks passed, the pressure mounted. Phone calls from my mother about dress fittings, accusations of selfishness when I missed the bridal shower due to a trial, guilt trips about family loyalty and obligation. I just don't understand you, Cassandra. My mother sighed during one particularly painful call. Your only sister is getting married, and you act like it's an inconvenience. Do you know how this looks? People are already talking about why you're never at family events. Mrs. Davidson asked if you were in rehab. I have a demanding job. Mother, I said, the familiar exhaustion creeping in. Victoria has a demanding job too, she countered. She's the youngest VP at her firm, and she still makes time for family. Always the comparison, always falling short. 2 weeks before the wedding, Dominic found me crying in our home office. Without a word, he pulled me into his lap, holding me while the tears fell. I'll go, I finally said. I'll go to the wedding. Alone. You have the California opening. Fuck the opening, Dominic said. And I was so startled by the profanity he rarely swore that I pulled back to look at him. I'm not letting you face them alone. Not anymore. Dominic. No, he said firmly. We've been married for 2 years. Cass. 2 years of watching them chip away at you, of seeing you come home smaller each time. I won't stand by anymore. It'll cause a scene, I protested, at Victoria's wedding. Then we'll skip the ceremony and just go to the reception, he compromised. But I'm going with you. It's time they knew that you're not alone, that you're loved, that you're valued, even if they can't see it themselves. We argued about it for days. I was terrified of the reaction, of the attention, of ruining Victoria's day. But Dominic was immovable in his quiet way. I love you, he said the night before we flew to London for his meeting. And I'm tired of loving you in secret. You deserve to be celebrated, not hidden. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and humid, typical Baltimore summer weather. Dominic was still in London, his meeting having run over, but he'd texted that he was catching a red-eye and would be there for the reception. Wear the blue dress, his last message read, the one that makes your eyes look like sapphires. And remember, you're extraordinary. I arrived at the Belvedere just as the ceremony was ending, having deliberately timed it to avoid the pre-wedding family photos and fuss. The ballroom was a vision in white and gold. Flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow patterns on the walls. Victoria looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Harrison handsome and appropriately attentive at her side. Cassandra. My mother materialized at my elbow, her smile tight. How nice of you to join us. I suppose court ran late again. Something like that, I murmured. She looked me up and down, her expression growing pinched. That's what you wore. I specifically said cocktail attire. That dress is so plain. The dress was actually one of my favorites, a deep blue sheath that Dominic had bought me in Paris. But to my mother's eyes, anything that didn't scream designer label was automatically inferior. Well, at least you're here, she continued. Though I don't know why you didn't RSVP properly. We had to scramble to add a seat at the family table. You are staying for the entire reception, aren't you? It would be embarrassing if you left early like you did at the engagement party. I'd left the engagement party early because my father had spent an hour telling Harrison's parents about his successful daughter's emphasis on the plural being purely technical. The cocktail hour was a minefield of familiar faces and awkward conversations. My aunts clustered together, whispering behind their hands when they saw me. Cousins asked pointed questions about my dating life with the kind of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. Family friends wondered aloud if I was still doing that prosecutor thing, as if it were a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. I found a quiet corner near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and watching the clock. Dominic's flight should have landed by now. He'd be fighting traffic, but he'd make it. He always kept his promises. Cassie. I turned to find Victoria approaching, her wedding dress bustling around her, a genuine smile on her face. Despite everything, I smiled back. This wasn't her fault. You look beautiful, Vic, I said, meaning it. Thanks, she said, then lowered her voice. I'm glad you came. I know Mom's been, well, Mom. But it means a lot that you're here. For a moment, I saw a flash of the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cry when I left for college, who'd once told me I was her hero. Before the golden child narrative took hold, before the comparisons became weapons, we'd just been sisters. I wouldn't miss it. I lied smoothly. Victoria glanced around, then leaned closer. Is it true you're seeing someone? Mom mentioned something about you possibly bringing a date. But then you came alone. My heart clenched, even now, even at her own wedding. My mother was spreading stories, creating narratives. I'd never mentioned bringing anyone. It's complicated, I said. Victoria's eyes softened. It always is with you, isn't it? Everything has to be complicated and secret. There was no malice in her tone, just a kind of sad resignation. I wish you'd let us in sometimes, Cass. We're your family. Before I could respond, Harrison appeared to whisk her away for more photos. I watched them go, the perfect couple gliding through their perfect day, and wondered what it felt like to fit so seamlessly into the life our parents had scripted. Dinner was announced, and I made my way to the family table. My place card was at the very end, an afterthought placement that spoke volumes. To my right was my father's ancient law partner. To my left, an empty chair meant for plus ones. The speeches began, and with each one, my discomfort grew. My father spoke eloquently about Victoria's accomplishments, her beauty, her brilliant future. He mentioned having 2 daughters exactly once, and even then only in passing. My mother gushed about wedding planning, about Victoria's exquisite taste, about the joy of seeing our baby so happy. The maid of honor, Victoria's best friend since prep school, told charming stories about their friendship. The best man cracked jokes about Harrison's golf game and praised Victoria's patience. And through it all, I sat silent and invisible, the ghost at the feast. And now, the MC announced as the speeches wound down. The father of the bride would like to say a few more words. My father stood again, champagne glass in hand, and my stomach dropped. Richard Bennett never stopped at just one speech. You know, he began, his voice carrying that courtroom authority that made judges lean forward. A man dreams certain dreams for his children: success, happiness, love, family. He paused, looking at Victoria and Harrison with unmistakable pride. Victoria has exceeded every dream. Harvard MBA, youngest VP in her firm's history. And now a wonderful marriage to a fine young man from a good family. She's everything a father could hope for. The crowd murmured appreciatively. I took a larger sip of wine. It's not easy, raising children, he continued, warming to his theme. Sometimes they follow the path you envision, and sometimes... His gaze found me, and I saw something cold in his eyes. Sometimes they insist on making things difficult. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the room. My older daughter, he said, and the way he said it like an obligation, a burden, made my hands clench in my lap. Cassandra has always been independent, stubborn, some might say, 30 years old, married to her job, no family of her own. Still trying to prove something, though I'm not sure what or to whom. The laughter was more nervous now. Victoria looked uncomfortable. My mother was smiling that fixed smile that meant she was mortified but determined not to show it. But that's the thing about family, Richard continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. We love them even when they disappoint us, even when they reject our values, our guidance, our attempts to help them find happiness, even when they show up late to their sister's wedding, alone, wearing... He gestured dismissively at me. Whatever that is. My face burned. 500 pairs of eyes seemed to turn toward me, taking in my simple dress, my solitary status, my failure to meet the Bennett standard. So let's raise a glass, my father concluded, lifting his champagne. To Victoria and Harrison, to the dreams that come true, the children who make us proud, and the hope that perhaps example will succeed where advice has failed. The room erupted in applause. I sat frozen, humiliated beyond words. This wasn't just the usual Bennett family dynamics, this was public evisceration, served with champagne and a smile, as people began to stand and move about, preparing for dancing. I finally found my voice. "Excuse me," I managed, pushing back from the table. I fled toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing escape, needing to be anywhere but in that ballroom where my worth had been so thoroughly diminished. But in my haste and humiliation, I didn't see the server with the tray of drinks until we collided. Red wine exploded everywhere on my dress, in my hair, dripping down my face like liquid shame. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The server gasped, but I was already moving, stumbling through the crowd that parted like I had something contagious. I burst onto the terrace, where the evening had turned into a full summer storm. Rain poured down, soaking me instantly. But I didn't care. I was already drenched in wine and mortification. What was a little more water? Cassandra. I turned to see several family members had followed me out, including my mother, Victoria, and of course, my father. "For God's sake, Cassandra, get inside," my mother hissed. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." I laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "Did you hear what he just said in there, in front of everyone?" "Your father was just being honest," my mother said. "If you're hurt by the truth, perhaps you should examine why." The truth. I spun to face my father. "You want to talk about truth? The truth is, I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, and nothing has ever been enough. Perfect grades weren't enough. Law school wasn't enough. Becoming a prosecutor, fighting for justice, making a difference, none of it matters because I'm not Victoria." "Don't be dramatic," my father said coldly. "This is exactly what I mean. Everything is a production with you, a rebellion. Even now, at your sister's wedding, you have to make it about yourself." I didn't want to come. The words exploded out of me. I knew this would happen. I knew you'd find a way to humiliate me, to remind me that I'm the family failure. But I came anyway because I hoped God. I actually hoped that maybe just once you could see me as something other than a disappointment. "Cass," Victoria started, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "This isn't your fault, Vic. This has never been your fault. But I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that it doesn't hurt, that your love isn't conditional, that I'm part of this family in any way that matters." Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain intensified. My dress clung to me, wine-stained and water-soaked, my carefully styled hair hanging in wet strings around my face. I looked like I felt destroyed. "You're being ridiculous," my mother said. "Get inside, get cleaned up, and stop this nonsense. People are watching." "People are always watching," I said quietly. "That's all that's ever mattered to you. How things look, what people think, the perfect Bennett family image. Well, I'm done being the crack in your perfect picture." I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. "If you walk away now, don't bother coming back," he said, his tone final. "I'm tired of your dramatics, your victim complex, your refusal to grow up, 30 years old and nothing to show for it but a middling career and a bad attitude." The words hit like physical blows. Around us, more family members had gathered, drawn by the drama. I saw my aunts whispering, my cousins staring, Harrison's family looking horrified. And through the glass doors, I could see the entire reception watching the show. "Richard, please," my mother said. But it was too late. My father stepped closer, his face twisted with years of disappointment and anger. "You want to know the truth. Cassandra. The real truth. You've been a disappointment since the day you decided you were too good for this family, too good for our values, our connections, our help. You think you're better than us with your crusade for justice and your holier-than-thou attitude? But look at you alone, bitter, ruining your sister's wedding because you can't stand to see her happy. That's not... You're pathetic," he continued, his voice rising. A 30-year-old spinster playing at being important while your sister actually makes something of herself. At least Victoria knows how to be a daughter, how to be a woman, how to be. He gestured sharply. And whether it was intentional or not, his hand caught my shoulder. I was already off balance, the terrace slick with rain, and I stumbled backward, right into the decorative fountain behind me. The water was cold and shallow, but the impact was devastating. I sat there, sprawled in the fountain in my ruined dress, as gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the watching crowd. Someone, probably one of my cousins, had their phone out, recording. This was it. Rock bottom. The final, ultimate humiliation. Sitting in a fountain at my sister's wedding, wine-stained and waterlogged, while my family and 500 guests witnessed my complete destruction. I looked up at my father, expecting to see regret, shock, maybe even concern. Instead, I saw satisfaction. He'd won. He'd finally, definitively put me in my place. "Get up," my mother hissed, mortified. "Cassandra, get up this instant." But I didn't move. Couldn't move. Something inside me had finally, irreparably broken. And that's when I heard it. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice cut through the rain and the whispers like a blade, deep, controlled, and vibrating with a fury I'd never heard before. Dominic stood at the terrace entrance, and even soaking wet in a fountain. I felt my heart leap, but this wasn't the gentleman who cooked me dinner and held me when I cried. This was Dominic Hayes, CEO of a billion-dollar company, and he looked ready to destroy everyone in his path. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood Marcus, his head of security, and 2 other members of his team. They looked like what they were: former military, alert and dangerous. But it was Dominic himself who commanded attention. Rain was already dampening his Tom Ford suit, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on me, taking in my position in the fountain, my ruined dress, my devastated expression. "Cassandra," he said, his voice gentling fractionally. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. His gaze shifted to my father, and the temperature on the terrace seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you push her?" The question was quiet, deadly. "Who the hell are you?" my father blustered, but I could see uncertainty creeping in. Richard Bennett was used to being the most powerful man in any room. But power recognized power, and Dominic radiated it. "I asked you a question," Dominic said, stepping closer. Marcus and his team moved with him, a subtle but unmistakable threat. "Did you push my wife?" The silence that followed was deafening. "You're what?" My mother's voice cracked. Dominic ignored her, moving past my frozen family to the fountain. He shrugged off his suit jacket and held it out to me. "Come on, sweetheart," he said softly. "Let's get you out of there." I took his hand, letting him help me out of the fountain. He wrapped the jacket around my shoulders, then pulled me against him, uncaring that I was soaking his shirt. "Wife?" Victoria whispered. "Cass, you're married." I nodded against Dominic's chest. "How long?" she asked. 2 years, I mumbled. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My mother's gasp, my father's curse, the whispers racing through the crowd like wildfire. 2 years. My mother's voice rose to a shriek. "You've been married for 2 years and didn't tell us." "I can't imagine why she wouldn't want to share her happiness with you," Dominic said, his tone arctic. "Not after that touching speech about disappointment and failure." He looked around the terrace, taking in the assembled family, the watching guests, the phones still recording. "Is this how you treat her?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly. "Public humiliation, emotional abuse, physical assault." "Now see here," my father started, but Dominic cut him off. "No, you see here," he said. "I've watched for 2 years as you've torn down the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. I've held her while she cried after your family dinners. I've seen her doubt herself because of your constant comparisons and criticisms. And I've respected her wish to handle this her way, to try to maintain some relationship with her family despite everything." He paused, his arm tightening around me. "But that ends tonight." You pushed her into a fountain at a formal event. You humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. You made her feel worthless on what should have been a celebration of family. We didn't know she was married, my mother protested weakly. And whose fault is that? Dominic asked. Did you ever ask about her life? Her happiness? Or were you too busy telling her everything she was doing wrong? He turned to my father specifically. You called her a 30-year-old spinster with a middling career. Let me tell you about your daughter, Mr. Bennett. She's the lead prosecutor for financial crimes in the Atlantic Bureau. She's put away criminals who've stolen millions from innocent people. She's brilliant, compassionate, and tireless in her pursuit of justice. Companies like mine consult with her because she's the best at what she does. His voice grew harder. And yes, she's married. To me. Dominic Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global. We're worth about $1.2 billion at last valuation. Not that it matters. What matters is that I love your daughter. I see her worth. I celebrate her victories and support her through challenges. I'm the family she chose. And I'll protect her from anyone who tries to hurt her, including you. The crowd was mesmerized. I saw Harrison's parents exchanging shocked looks, my aunts gaping, cousins frantically Googling on their phones. Dominic Hayes, someone whispered. The Dominic Hayes, the cybersecurity guy who just got that Pentagon contract. My father's face had gone from red to white. Hayes Global is yours. Built it from nothing, Dominic confirmed. Just like Cassandra built her career from nothing, we're self-made, Mr. Bennett. We don't need your connections or your approval. We have each other. He looked down at me, his expression softening. You ready to go home? He asked quietly. I nodded, finally finding my voice. Yes. We started to leave, but I stopped, turning back to face my family one last time. I loved you, I said, my voice stronger now. All of you. Despite everything. I loved you and wanted to be part of this family. But love shouldn't require me to be smaller, quieter, less than I am. Love shouldn't come with conditions and comparisons and constant criticism. I looked at Victoria, whose face was streaked with tears. I'm sorry this happened at your wedding. Vic, you deserved better. We both did. Then I let Dominic lead me away. Through the ballroom where hundreds of guests pretended not to stare, out to where Marcus had brought the car around. As we pulled away from the Belvedere, I looked back once. Through the rain, I could see figures on the terrace, my family, still frozen in shock, still processing what had just happened. I'm sorry I was late, Dominic said, taking my hand. The flight was delayed, and traffic was horrible. If I'd been here sooner. You were right on time, I said, meaning it. We drove in silence for a while before Dominic spoke again. That was our last family event with them. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. Good, he said fiercely. You deserve so much better. Cass. So much more than they could ever give you. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, their approval, their recognition, all the tears, all the doubt, all the pieces of myself I'd carved away trying to fit into their mold. I know that now, I said softly. Back at our penthouse, I took a long, hot shower, washing away the wine and fountain water and the residue of 30 years of not being enough. When I emerged, Dominic was waiting with hot tea and fresh pajamas. Your phone's been buzzing, he said carefully. A lot? I looked at the screen. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of texts. Victoria, my mother, aunts, cousins, numbers I didn't recognize. The family grapevine working overtime. Without reading a single message, I powered the phone off. Tomorrow, I said. I'll deal with it tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went, and I didn't turn the phone back on. Days passed, then weeks. Dominic fielded calls at his office, politely but firmly refusing to put them through to me. Marcus intercepted flower deliveries and letters. I threw myself into work, into my marriage, into building a life that wasn't defined by the Bennett's opinion of me. Dominic and I took that delayed trip to California. We had dinner with his mother, who hugged me and told me I was the daughter she'd always wanted. We hosted game nights with our real friends, people who knew and loved us both. The stories about the wedding made the society pages, of course. Bennett family drama at society wedding. Fountain fiasco reveals secret marriage to tech billionaire. My father tried to do damage control, but the narrative had already taken hold. The powerful attorney who'd publicly humiliated his daughter, only to discover she'd married one of the most successful young CEOs in the country. 3 months later, Victoria showed up at my office. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the perfectly polished society wife. She looked tired, older somehow, though only months had passed. "Can we talk?" she asked. I could have said no. Probably should have. But she was still my sister, and old habits die hard. We went to a coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral territory. "I left Harrison," she said without preamble. I blinked, shocked. "What? Why?" "Because watching what happened at my wedding, what Dad did to you, what we all did to you finally made me see our family clearly." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was cold. "And I realized I'd married Harrison because it was expected, because Mom orchestrated it, because it fit the plan. Not because I loved him." "Vic, you were right," she continued. "About everything. The conditions, the comparisons, the criticism. I just never felt it the way you did because I was the one who met their expectations. But that's its own kind of prison, isn't it? Being the golden child means you can never stop being golden." We sat in silence for a moment. "I'm seeing a therapist," she said. "Trying to figure out who I am without Mom and Dad's voices in my head. It's harder than I thought it would be." "It gets easier," I told her. "Not easy, but easier." "I'm sorry," she said, tears spilling over. "For all of it. For not standing up for you. For benefiting from their favoritism. For being part of the system that hurt you. I'm so sorry. Cass." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I know." We talked for 2 hours. About childhood, about the dynamics we'd both been trapped in, about the future. She was staying with a friend, looking for her own place, considering leaving the firm that had hired her because of our father's connections. "I want to know my sister," she said as we prepared to leave. "The real one, not the version our parents created. And I want to know Dominic. He must be pretty amazing to inspire that kind of loyalty." "He is." I agreed. We hugged goodbye. And I promised to call her. Maybe we could build something new from the wreckage of our family. Maybe not. But for the first time, it would be on our terms. I never reconciled with my parents. They made a few more attempts through lawyers, through family friends, once through a particularly tone-deaf letter that managed to be both an apology and a lecture. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And some bridges needed to burn. Dominic and I had our public wedding a year later. Not because we needed it. We'd been happily married for 3 years already, but because we wanted to celebrate with the people who actually loved us. His mother danced with tears in her eyes. My former law school roommate gave a speech that had everyone laughing. Victoria came, still finding her own way, but genuine in her happiness for us. It wasn't a Bennett-style society wedding. It was better. It was real. Standing on the terrace of our reception venue, not the Belvedere, never the Belvedere. I looked out at the celebration below. Our friends laughing, music playing, joy that didn't need to be performed because it simply was. "Any regrets?" Dominic asked, coming up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I thought about it. About the family I'd lost, or maybe never really had. About the years of pain and self-doubt. About the fountain and the humiliation and the very public breakdown of the Bennett family facade. "No," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "No regrets?" Because sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the family you're born into. Sometimes love means letting go of people who can only love conditionally. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you stop trying to be what everyone else wants you to be, You finally become who you were always meant to be. I turned in Dominic's arms, kissing him as the sun set over Baltimore's inner harbor. Below us, our chosen family celebrated our love. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. Not in the shadows of someone else's expectations. Not at the edge of every family photo, but right here, in the center of my own story. Finally and completely enough.